There was a man in ancient Rome who watched his enemies destroy themselves with words, while he said nothing, and years later, he was the only one still standing. His name doesn't matter yet. What matters is this: somewhere in your life, right now, someone is trying to pull a reaction out of you. A comment, a betrayal, a silence that hurts more than shouting. And every single day, you are being tested to see if you will spend your energy explaining yourself to people who are never going to understand you anyway. If you stay until the end of this, you will hear the exact method the Stoics used to become untouchable, not by fighting back, but by disappearing into their own mind, where no one could follow them, because the truth is brutal and very few people want to hear it. Most of what destroys your peace isn't the insult itself, it's your need to respond to it. Let's go back more than 2,000 years to a philosophy built by men who had every reason to explode with anger and chose silence instead. Epictetus was born a slave. He was beaten so badly as a young man that his leg was permanently broken, and yet history remembers him not for his suffering, but for one sentence that changed how humans think about control. Some things are up to us and some things are not. Read that again. Not some things are fair or some things are deserved. Just up to us or not up to us. Your reputation in the eyes of a stranger, not up to you. The way your family judges your choices, not up to you. Whether someone respects your silence or mistakes it for weakness, not up to you. But how you spend your next hour, what you build with your hands, whether you let a cruel comment leave rent free in your mind for the next 6 hours, that is entirely, completely, terrifyingly up to you. Epictetus understood something that most people never learn even after a lifetime of getting hurt. The moment you start needing other people to see you correctly, you have handed them the steering wheel of your own life. This is where the idea of staying silent stops being about weakness and starts being about strategy. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the known world, an emperor who could have ordered the execution of anyone who insulted him, wrote himself private notes reminding himself not to waste time proving people wrong. He wrote in what we now call meditations that he did not have time to worry about whether someone was good or bad. He had a life to live, work to do, silence to protect. Think about that. The most powerful human being on earth, someone who had every tool of power available to punish his critics, chose instead to write journal entries reminding himself to let it go. If a Roman emperor with an army behind him understood that responding to every provocation was beneath him, why do we think we owe an explanation to a coworker's snide comment, a family member's backhanded remark, or a stranger's opinion on the internet? The Stoics weren't teaching passivity. They were teaching something far more dangerous to your enemies: emotional invisibility. When you stop reacting, people lose their power over you, because their entire strategy depended on your response. Here is the part that most people skip past too quickly, because it sounds simple until you actually try to live it. Focusing on yourself doesn't mean becoming cold or isolating from everyone or pretending you don't care. It means redirecting the exact same energy you would have spent defending your name, explaining your decisions, or replaying an argument in the shower at midnight, and instead pouring all of it into your own growth, your own work, your own becoming. Seneca, a Stoic writer and advisor who lived through some of the most dangerous political betrayals in Roman history, wrote to a friend that people spend their lives complaining about the shortness of life while they themselves waste it on things that don't matter. He wasn't talking about lazy people. He was talking about brilliant, driven people who nonetheless drained their best years defending their pride instead of building their future. Every time you explain yourself to someone who has already decided not to understand you, you are handing them a piece of your one, finite life. And they didn't even have to ask for it. You gave it away for free. There's a reason ancient philosophy keeps resurfacing today on phones, in bedrooms at 2 a.m., in the minds of people who feel unseen and misunderstood. Because the problem the Stoics solved for the Roman world is the exact same problem you're dealing with in a world of comment sections, group chats, and family gatherings where someone always had something to say. The battlefield changed, the war did not. And so far, we've only looked at why silence matters and why other people's opinions were never actually yours to carry. But there is a second, sharper layer to this philosophy, one that explains exactly how to build a self so complete, so quietly powerful, that criticism simply stops landing. That's where we're going next, into the part of Stoic practice almost nobody talks about, the discipline of not needing to be understood at all. Somewhere in Rome, a young student once asked his teacher a question that sounds almost childish at first. What do I do when someone spreads lies about me and I know the truth? The teacher didn't tell him to fight back. He didn't tell him to gather proof or confront the liar or demand justice in front of a crowd. He told him something far stranger: let them talk, and go live your life so well that eventually the lie won't be able to survive next to the evidence of who you actually are. That teacher was a Stoic, and that answer is the exact discipline almost nobody practices today, the art of not needing to be understood. We live in a world obsessed with being seen correctly. We screenshot conversations to prove a point. We rehearse arguments in our heads before we even go to sleep, defending ourselves against people who probably forgot the conversation happened hours ago. And underneath all of it is one quiet, exhausting belief that our worth depends on other people getting the story right. The Stoics looked at this obsession and called it exactly what it is: slavery to an audience that was never paying that much attention to begin with. Here's something almost no one tells you, and it will sting a little the first time you hear it. The people you're most desperate to be understood by are usually the ones least capable of understanding you. Not because they're evil, but because understanding requires effort, and most people are too buried in their own noise to spend that effort on you. Marcus Aurelius knew this painfully well. As emperor, he was surrounded by advisors, generals, senators, family members, an entire empire of people with opinions about him, and yet in his private writings, the ones never meant to be read by anyone else, he kept returning to the same idea: waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one, not convince people you're a good man, not correct the record. Just be one and let the being speak for itself. This is the exact opposite of how most of us live. We spend our nights composing the perfect response to an insult, polishing a comeback like it's a weapon, when the Stoics would say that very effort is the wound, not the insult itself. The insult passed in 3 seconds. Your mind kept it alive for 3 hours. Now here's where this philosophy gets uncomfortable, because it demands something most people aren't ready to admit. If you keep needing people to understand you, agree with you, or validate your choices, you have quietly made your peace of mind dependent on things you cannot control: other people's minds, moods, jealousy, and misunderstanding. Epictetus put it in a way that still lands like a punch centuries later. It is not events that disturb people, but their judgments about events. Someone insults you, that's an event, gone in an instant. But your mind grabs it, replays it, adds meaning to it, decides it says something about your worth, and suddenly a 3-second comment is running your entire evening. The event didn't do that to you, your judgment did. And judgment, unlike other people's opinions, is completely, entirely yours to control. This is not about suppressing emotion or pretending you're a robot. It's about recognizing the split second between something happening and you deciding what it means, and training yourself to own that split second like your life depends on it, because in a very real sense, it does. This is also why staying silent isn't weakness, it's information control. Every time you explain yourself to someone who wasn't asking in good faith, you're handing them material. You're showing them exactly which words land, which accusations sting, which insecurities are still raw enough to provoke a reaction. Silence removes that map. When you don't explain, don't defend, don't perform your innocence for an audience that already decided the verdict, you keep your inner world exactly that, inner, private, undisturbed by people who were never invited into it in the first place. Seneca once wrote to a grieving friend that the real tragedy wasn't the loss itself, but the way people allow other people's opinions about their grief to dictate how they're allowed to heal. That idea stretches far beyond grief. It applies to your career, your relationships, your reputation, your entire sense of self. The moment you let a crowd, real or imagined, decide how you should feel about your own life, you've outsourced the one thing that was supposed to be untouchable. So what does a person actually do with all of this? Not in theory, but tomorrow morning, when someone says something designed to provoke you? The Stoics left behind an answer that sounds almost too simple to be real, and yet it is the exact hinge this entire philosophy turns on. It has nothing to do with ignoring people, and nothing to do with pretending to be unbothered. It has everything to do with where you choose to place your attention in the 60 seconds after you feel that first spark of anger. And that single choice, repeated daily, is what separates someone who is dragged through life reacting to everyone around them, from someone who moves through the world untouched, quiet, and completely in command of themselves. That exact method, the 60-second discipline the Stoics practiced before every difficult conversation, is what we're building toward next. There's a moment every single person on earth has experienced, and yet almost no one has ever been taught what to do with it. Someone says something cruel or dismissive or designed to get under your skin, and for one heartbeat before any words come out of your mouth, there is a gap, a tiny, silent window where nothing has been decided yet. Most people never even notice this gap exists because their reaction fills it instantly, automatically, like a reflex. But the Stoics built an entire discipline around that one gap because they understood something that modern psychology would only prove true thousands of years later. You cannot always control the spark of anger that rises in you, but you have almost complete control over what happens in the 60 seconds after it. That gap is where your whole life either stays yours or gets handed over to whoever just provoked you. And the terrifying part is this: most people give it away without even realizing there was ever a choice. Epictetus taught something so practical it almost sounds like a trick, and yet it changed the way his students survived a world filled with cruelty, slavery, and public humiliation. He told them to treat every provocation as a test sent by life itself, a kind of exam question disguised as an insult. When someone insults you, he said, remember that it is not the person who is disturbing you. It is your own belief about the insult. So in that 60-second gap, before you respond, before you defend yourself, before you type the furious message you'll regret in an hour, the practice is simple to describe and brutally hard to live. Ask yourself one question: is this actually about me, or is this about the person saying it? Almost every single time, cruelty is a mirror turned outward. People who are at peace with themselves do not spend their energy trying to destroy someone else's peace. The person throwing the insult is usually drowning in something you cannot see: insecurity, envy, exhaustion, unresolved pain, and they are handing it to you like a package, hoping you'll carry it. For them, the 60-second discipline is simply this: notice the package before you pick it up. Marcus Aurelius practiced a version of this every single day as emperor, and he wrote about it not as some noble act of forgiveness, but as pure self-preservation. He reminded himself each morning that he would meet ungrateful people, arrogant people, liars, and people who envied his position, and he decided in advance, before it even happened, that none of it would be allowed to disturb the one thing that actually belonged to him, his own mind. This is the part almost nobody applies correctly. Preparing yourself before the provocation happens is 10 times more powerful than trying to control yourself in the middle of it. If you wait until someone is already yelling at you, already insulting you, already trying to pull you into their chaos, you have already lost half the battle because your body is flooded with adrenaline and your judgment is compromised. But if you walk into your day already having decided today, someone might try to provoke me and it will not work, you arrive at that 60-second gap already standing on solid ground instead of scrambling to find your footing in the middle of the storm. This is also where silence becomes an active weapon rather than a passive retreat. When you don't respond immediately, you are not being weak, and you are not losing the argument, no matter how much your ego screams that you are. You are doing something the other person cannot do, because they've already lost control of themselves. Seneca wrote that the very best response to insult is often no response at all, because a person who is genuinely secure does not feel the itch to prove their security to anyone. Think about that phrase for a second, the itch to prove it. That itch is exactly what gets triggered in the 60-second gap, and it is exactly what the Stoics trained themselves to recognize and let pass. The same way you'd notice an itch on your skin and choose not to scratch it, knowing it will fade on its own if you just don't feed it. The moment you stop scratching every provocation, you stop giving it the one thing it needs to survive, your attention. But here is the piece of this puzzle that most people, even those who have heard of Stoicism, never actually put into practice, and it's the part that turns this from a nice idea into a real transformation of how you move through the world. It's not enough to just resist reacting. If all you do is bottle everything up and say nothing while quietly stewing on the inside, you haven't practiced Stoicism, you've practiced suppression, and suppression always finds a way to leak out somewhere else, usually onto people who didn't deserve it. The real discipline requires a second step, one that redirects all of that held back energy into something that actually builds your life instead of just containing your anger. And that redirection, the exact practice the Stoics used to turn silence into strength instead of into suffering, is what we're about to walk through next, because it's the difference between someone who merely survives provocation and someone who becomes completely unshakable because of it. Go back to the beginning of this, to the man who watched his enemies destroy themselves with words while he said nothing and outlasted every single one of them. What we never told you is what he did with all that silence, because silence by itself is not the secret. A person can stay quiet for years and still be eaten alive on the inside, still replaying every insult at 3 a.m., still measuring their worth by people who never deserved a place in their thoughts. That is not Stoicism. That is just suffering with your mouth closed. The real secret, the piece the Stoics guarded like the most valuable tool they owned, is what you do with the energy you didn't spend defending yourself. Because that energy doesn't disappear just because you didn't argue. It has to go somewhere. And the entire philosophy of focusing on yourself comes down to one decision, repeated daily, about where that energy is allowed to land. Marcus Aurelius gave the clearest answer to this that has ever been written down, and it's astonishing how simple it sounds until you try to actually live it. He told himself over and over, in notes meant for no one but himself, to waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be, and instead be one. Notice the redirection in that sentence. He didn't say ignore the criticism and do nothing. He said take the exact energy that criticism would have consumed and pour it into becoming instead of into proving. This is the difference between someone who stays silent and slowly rots with resentment, and someone who stays silent and quietly becomes so competent, so complete, so undeniable, that the criticism eventually just stops making sense to anyone listening to it. Silence without direction is just suppression. Silence pointed at your own growth is a weapon nobody can defend against, because there's nothing to fight. You're not in the room arguing, you're somewhere else building. Seneca lived this out in a way that's almost impossible to imagine today. He was accused, exiled, betrayed by people he had trusted with his life, and forced to watch enemies rise in influence while he was pushed to the margins. And in that exile, instead of spending his years writing furious letters demanding justice, he wrote some of the most enduring philosophy in human history, letters on ethics, essays on shortness of life, reflections that are still quoted 2,000 years later by people who have never even heard his enemies' names. Think about that irony for a moment. The people who tried to destroy him are historical footnotes. He is the philosophy. Not because he fought back, but because he took the years he could have wasted on bitterness and turned them into something that outlived every single person who wronged him. That is what focusing on yourself actually means. It's not selfishness. It's not coldness. It is the recognition that your one, finite, irreplaceable life is too short to spend narrating your innocence to people who already made up their minds, and far too valuable to hand over to anyone who didn't earn the privilege of shaping how you feel. So here is what this actually looks like on an ordinary Tuesday, not in ancient Rome, but in your life right now. Someone says something that stings. The old version of you would have replayed it for hours, drafted the perfect comeback, maybe even said something back that you didn't fully mean, just to feel like you'd defended yourself. The Stoic version pauses in that 60-second gap, asks whether this is actually about you or about the person saying it, lets the insult pass through without setting up camp in your mind, and then, this is the part that changes everything, takes the exact energy that would have gone into the argument and puts it into the work, the relationship, the version of yourself you're actually trying to build, not as a punishment to the other person, not as a performance of not caring, but because you finally understood the way Marcus Aurelius understood, the way Seneca understood, the way that quiet man in Rome understood, that every minute spent explaining yourself to people who will not listen is a minute stolen from becoming someone impossible to explain away. This is the whole philosophy, stripped down to its final form. Focus on yourself, not because other people don't matter, but because your peace was never supposed to depend on their understanding. Stay silent, not because you have nothing to say, but because you finally have somewhere better to put what you're carrying. The people who provoke you are, more often than not, drowning in something you cannot see, and they are hoping you'll climb into the water with them. You don't have to. You can stand on the shore, quiet, steady, and simply keep building the life that will eventually speak for you louder than any argument ever could. 2,000 years from now, no one will remember the people who tried to provoke you. If you do this right, they may still be reading about how you didn't let them.